There are moments in a life when the air shifts. You don't hear the change, but you feel it. A tremble in your gut, a stillness in the room, a sense that something irreversible has just taken place. For Alexandria, it happened in the middle of a quiet night, her phone screen lighting up with an alert that didn't just disturb her sleep, it shook the ground beneath her identity. CNN had just broken the news. Senator John N. Kennedy, Louisiana's silver-tongued conservative warrior, had filed an $80 million defamation lawsuit against her. Not a tweet, not political theater, a full-scale legal strike. She stared at the screen, one notification, then 10, then hundreds. Her name was everywhere. But not as a rising progressive star, not as the passionate face of climate action. No, this time she was the accused. And in the eyes of the law, of the media, of the public, potentially the guilty. Before we dive deeper, take a moment, click subscribe. This channel is building something different. We dissect power with truth, we tell stories with heart. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers and be part of this journey from the ground up. And ask yourself, what happens when words meant to spark justice become the fire that consumes everything? Alexandria had been called many things before. Radical, dangerous, fearless, but never reckless, never defamatory, never a legal liability. The accusation came fast, the backlash faster. In an Instagram live stream, AOC had done what she always did, spoken her mind, with passion, with clarity, with the fire of someone who believed every word. She had pointed fingers at a system she saw as corrupt, and at one man in particular. He's selling our children's future for oil money. Those words echoed across 200,000 screens. And in one of those screens, inside a dimly lit office in Baton Rouge, Senator Kennedy watched. His fingers didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. He simply leaned forward and clicked replay. Let's talk about Kennedy, because this isn't just about politics. It's about two worlds colliding. He's not a caricature, though his southern charm and witty one-liners might fool you. He's sharp. Educated at Vanderbilt, Oxford, decades of experience, from state treasurer to the U.S. Senate. He plays the long game, quiet, patient, methodical. So when AOC accused him directly of taking illicit money from oil conglomerates to stall environmental reform, he didn't lash out. He assembled a team, he gathered documents, he made calls, and then he filed $80 million. That number wasn't arbitrary. It was a message, a declaration that this wouldn't be dismissed with a tweet. It was a demand for accountability, one that turned every camera, every microphone, every pair of political eyes toward an unfolding war. In Alexandria's Washington office, panic wasn't immediate. At first, it was indignation. She'd been attacked before. This was just another smear, or so she thought. But within hours, everything began to unravel. An internal email, leaked, authentic, devastating. A single line buried in casual language, now screamed across headlines. Find anything, true or not, to prove he's betraying voters. True or not. 3 words that cut through every defense she'd ever built. Let me pause here. Let this sink in. Have you ever said something you didn't think would matter? Not really. Only for it to be the thread that unraveled everything you've built? She had always believed her passion was her strength, her voice, her weapon. But now that voice, amplified to millions, became evidence in a courtroom. And the people who once echoed her every word, some were stepping away. Quietly, carefully. Even friends, even mentors. In moments like these, truth becomes a mirror, not a shield, and what it reflects can be hard to face. This isn't just about two politicians, it's about how power works now. Social media versus law, emotion versus procedure, instinct versus strategy. Kennedy stayed quiet while Alexandria went loud, another live stream, another defiant tweet. But this time, the replies were different. Where's the proof? Why not just say you were wrong? She didn't back down, but the ground was slipping, and her party, silent. Not in opposition, just absent. Like someone walking slowly backward in the dark, hoping no one notices. Pelosi, Schumer, Sanders, Omar, Tlaib, no one defended her outright. Not anymore. Not with this much risk. What do you do when the people you fought beside leave you standing alone? You fight harder, or you fall apart, or both. As Kennedy toured Louisiana, smiling among factory workers, speaking of dignity, truth, and justice, AOC sat with her team in a closed-door crisis meeting. Staff were scared, morale fractured, and then the unthinkable, a leak from within. A senior advisor anonymously claimed, "We warned her. She didn't listen." This was no longer political warfare. It was an implosion, one she hadn't seen coming. A federal judge refused to throw out the case. Headlines screamed, "AOC's motion denied. Lawsuit moves forward." Legal analysts, even those sympathetic to her, admitted it. This was serious. Very serious. Defamation cases are notoriously hard to prove, unless you can show malice. And the email, it looked like malice. She sold her apartment to pay legal fees. Her mother was hounded by reporters outside their Bronx home. Security was hired, finances dwindled, reputation fragile. In her apartment, long after the world had gone quiet, Alexandria scrolled through comment after comment. Some still believed in her, others felt betrayed. And the worst ones, the ones that kept her awake, weren't cruel. They were disappointed. You were supposed to be better. You let us down. You gave them a weapon. And maybe they were right. This was only the beginning. In the next episode, we'll explore the courtroom clash, where ideals and evidence collide, where two very different visions of America face off beneath the judge's gaze, and where, for the first time, AOC must decide whether silence is more powerful than speech. The courtroom was cold, not physically, but in presence, the kind of sterile stillness where even emotion seemed to whisper. Alexandria sat at the plaintiff's table, posture straight, gaze fixed, hands clutched tighter than she realized. Her name, her entire identity, was now inked into a federal docket, case number 21CV0418. She didn't blink when Kennedy walked in. He moved with the calm of someone who had already played this game, who understood that appearances in courtrooms were performances of restraint, not fury. The public watched from outside, cameras flashing, pundits speculating, voters arguing, but inside those walls it was different, intimate, unforgiving, real. Kennedy's legal team began with confidence, no drama, just chronology, facts, her live stream, the leaked email, the timing, the intent, and then they said it, actual malice. Two words that transformed the case from a political controversy into a legal minefield. It wasn't enough to be wrong. It had to be knowingly wrong, intentionally damaging. And the email? It looked like a smoking gun. Before we go deeper, a reminder, if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Help us grow to our first 1,000 subscribers. These stories matter because they reveal what happens behind the curtain of American power. They are about more than politics. They are about human cost. Ask yourself, what is the price of conviction when the world starts charging interest? AOC's defense was layered, complicated. Her attorneys argued that she was engaging in protected political speech, that her words were harsh, yes, but allowable, that calling out corruption, even emotionally, is not the same as defaming someone, but the prosecution had more. They revealed internal memos with messages between staffers. One of them, a draft media plan, explicitly used the phrase, "Let's paint him as Big Oil's puppet." The judge took notes. The jury watched closely. Alexandria's mind wasn't on the jury. It was on her mother, watching from home behind drawn curtains in the Bronx. On her staff, fractured and quiet. On the millions of young progressives who had once called her their voice, now unsure if that voice spoke with care. The trial wasn't fast. It stretched on, day after day. And in every courtroom hour, Alexandria learned a lesson no campaign could prepare her for. That power without precision is dangerous. She wasn't on the witness stand yet, but she knew it was coming. And when it did, she would need more than conviction. She would need humility. and truth. Her advisors urged her to settle, privately, quietly, but she refused. Because what she said, she still believed. Because walking back her words now would feel like walking back her entire identity. Because Kennedy, calm, collected Kennedy, was winning not just in court, but in perception. Public support was shifting. Her supporters hadn't abandoned her. Not all of them, but doubt had taken root. Doubt grows fast in silence. Online, memes of the courtroom testimony began to circulate, her face in still frames, captions like, "From firebrand to defendant." Speech has consequences. Even truth needs proof. AOC watched them late at night, headphones on, volume low. Alone. The apartment felt smaller now. Legal bills mounted. Even selling her previous home hadn't bought her much time. Her phone rang less. Her team spoke more in whispers. And every morning she walked into that courtroom with a single question etched into her chest. Did I cross the line? When it was finally her turn to testify, there was no dramatic music, no cinematic rise, just a slow walk to the stand. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and then she spoke. Not to defend herself, but to explain. She talked about why she got into politics, about standing outside food banks as a child, about watching neighborhoods decay while corporations profited, about believing maybe too much in the power of words, and then finally, about Kennedy. She admitted she saw him as the embodiment of a system that hurt people she loved. She admitted she was angry, that she wanted to hit hard, that she went live that night not to start a legal war but to make people feel seen. But she also admitted this. I didn't check my words. I let passion override caution. And I understand now that in public life that can cause real harm. The courtroom was silent, not because she was dramatic, but because she was human. Even Kennedy, watching from across the room, didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, slowly, as if to say, now you understand the weight. Outside the courthouse, the crowds were smaller, fewer cameras, fewer headlines. But inside, something had shifted, not legally, not yet, but emotionally. Because in that moment, Alexandria didn't play a politician, or a victim, she played herself. The sun filtered through thick courthouse glass as Alexandria stepped into the third week of legal warfare. By now, the cameras had found new headlines. Journalists paced less feverishly outside the courthouse. But inside, the storm was only deepening. There's a strange transformation that happens during public trials. Faces you once smiled at become masks of procedure. Words you once wielded like swords now sit in transcripts dissected and stripped of fire. And allies, if you still have any, become echoes in silent rooms. Alexandria had always been an advocate, a fighter. She spoke of green futures, of hope wrapped in legislation, but none of that mattered now. This wasn't Congress. This wasn't Twitter. This was federal court, where intention must be proven and interpretation means little beside evidence. Kennedy's team had built a meticulous case, not with rage or theatrical flair, but with quiet, suffocating precision. They didn't try to destroy her. They tried to dissolve her credibility one line, one email, one motive at a time. And it was working. The judge was no stranger to political cases. His expression never changed. He listened, took notes, occasionally looked over his glasses with a long, quiet breath that meant more than entire monologues. Each time he did that, Alexandria felt her stomach knot tighter. The prosecution brought forward another set of documents, internal communications from her staff, some months before the live stream. We need to hammer Kennedy on this. Use everything. Don't let facts get in the way of framing. They weren't damning alone, but together, they painted a portrait, one where AOC wasn't just angry, but strategic in her accusations. A narrative not of justice, but ambition. She felt her skin tighten as those lines were read aloud, not because they were lies, but because they were raw, unfiltered, honest in the way that's dangerous in politics. Honesty, it seemed, had edges that cut both ways. Outside the courtroom, The progressive movement simmered in quiet fracture. Activist networks were split. The same communities that once hailed AOC as the North Star of new politics were now debating in private Discord channels, closed group chats, and cautious live streams. Some still stood behind her, armor raised. Others, especially newer voices, questioned the recklessness of her approach. "You don't throw accusations without concrete receipts," said a young environmental lawyer in a panel stream. "Even if the system is rigged, even if you're right in your gut, law demands proof." The truth was, many agreed with her message, but fewer and fewer agreed with the method, and fewer still were willing to stake their own credibility defending it. Her nights blurred together. Coffee, folders, late calls, exhausted staff, and headlines that flickered between condemnation and cautious sympathy. She'd begun dreaming of courtroom ceilings, of microphones, of the phrase "actual malice" whispered in unfamiliar voices. And then came the pivot. Kennedy's team called their final witness, a political communications expert not affiliated with either party, brought in to evaluate Alexandria's live stream rhetoric from a professional standpoint. "In my view," the expert said calmly, adjusting glasses that reflected the courtroom light, "the Congresswoman's words moved beyond passionate critique. She wasn't speaking generally about systemic corruption. She named a man, accused him of criminal activity, without proof. That crosses into reputational harm." The words were sharp, unemotional, delivered like a diagnosis. AOC exhaled slowly. She wasn't just battling Kennedy anymore. She was fighting the framework of political speech itself. The very battlefield she had once mastered now felt like quicksand. Her legal team prepared to rest their case, but one advisor, an older woman with decades in constitutional law, quietly placed a hand on Alexandria's wrist. "Tell your story," she whispered, "before they write it for you." The next morning, without media fanfare or press coordination, Alexandria returned to the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't deflect. She just spoke. She spoke of rage, of watching friends poisoned by polluted air in the Bronx, of learning that policy is often shaped behind closed doors, not in chambers of justice, of the aching realization that moral clarity does not always mean legal safety. "I believed what I said," she told the court, "and maybe I said it wrong. Maybe I said too much. But I've lived in a world where if you don't say it loud, no one listens, and I didn't think about how loud could mean dangerous." The judge didn't react. The room was silent, but something subtle shifted in the air. Not a win, not a reversal, just a moment of undeniable humanity. Later that week, Kennedy took a different path. He held a town hall in his home state, not to gloat, not to escalate, but to explain. "I've been called many things," he said, hands folded in front of a blue-collar audience. "But I never expected to be accused of corruption without evidence, and not by a stranger, by a colleague." His voice didn't rise. He didn't insult her. Instead, he spoke of trust, how fragile it was, how quickly it can turn from foundation to fracture. His message resonated, not because he was a saint, but because he appeared measured, in control. Alexandria watched the video of the town hall in her office, headphones on. There were no memes, no interruptions, just that quiet feeling of watching a man use calm as a scalpel. She felt the weight again, not of guilt, but of consequence. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that whispers. In D.C., silence became a strategy. The Democratic leadership said little. Supporters in the House avoided the topic. Progressive caucus meetings grew colder. Doors that once opened for her now stayed closed or cracked just enough for polite nods. She walked Capitol Hill like a ghost of her former presence, still recognizable, still potent, but haunted by legal gravity. Her staff remained loyal, but their smiles had faded. The office coffee pot rarely brewed past noon. Morale was no longer lifted by tweets or likes. They needed something real, something grounded. They needed the storm to end, but it wasn't ending. Kennedy's legal team filed a request for an accelerated damages hearing. They wanted to move to the next phase, where numbers turned from hypothetical to real, where $80 million wasn't just a headline, but a sentence. Alexandria sat with her financial advisors that night. "What happens if I lose?" she asked plainly. The oldest among them, a man who had advised campaigns for decades, leaned forward. "You'll owe more than money," he said. "You'll owe silence. Settlements often come with it. And if I fight it, you could lose everything, but your voice will still be yours." It wasn't much of a choice. Not to her. She went home, opened her laptop, and began drafting a letter. Not to donors, not to the media, but to the people who had believed in her from the start. A letter not of defense, but of reflection. An attempt to reconnect not through defiance, but through transparency. She didn't publish it. Not yet. But the act of writing it reminded her who she was beneath the headline. As week 4 of the trial approached, the nation began to tune back in. Not because of new bombshells, but because something rare had emerged. Two politicians facing off, not in anger, but in complexity. One had struck too hard, one had struck back too coldly, and in between, a country asked itself, what do we want our leaders to be? Unyielding, humble, loud, careful? Can justice be a learning process, or must it always be a punishment? The next phase of the trial promised harder truths. Financial disclosures, motive, consequence. And a question that had no simple answer. How do you price reputation? The fourth week unfolded with the weight of unsaid truths and delayed consequences. At first glance, things looked calm, as if the storm had passed. But inside Alexandria's world, the pressure was only just beginning to show in cracks invisible to outsiders. Cracks in her relationships, cracks in her political infrastructure, and worst of all, cracks in her own self-belief. Because the truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper you ignore until it's too late. She sat in her office, the blinds drawn, email inbox overflowing with headlines and requests for comment. But none of that mattered at this moment. Her eyes weren't on her screen. They were locked on a photo on her desk, one from her first swearing-in ceremony. She looked younger, fiercer, untouched by the acid of scandal. That version of her still lived somewhere inside. But it felt so far away now. One by one, her inner circle thinned. Not in some dramatic exodus, no angry resignations or public betrayals, but in slow, deliberate silences. Phone calls not returned, messages left unread, meetings missed with vague apologies. Even those who stayed became more careful. Her chief of staff now triple-checked talking points before any public comment. Her communications director asked if live streams were still necessary. "People are listening differently now," she said quietly. What she meant was, they're waiting for you to fall again. The lawsuit itself was transforming. What started as a question of defamation had evolved into something bigger, something cultural, symbolic. A battle not just between AOC and Kennedy, but between two visions of political leadership. One loud, digital, emotional, the other calculated, procedural, patient. And the country? Watching, not just as voters, but as judges. Everyone had an opinion, and every opinion became its own headline. The Intercept published a scathing think piece, "When Rhetoric Drowns Responsibility, the AOC Reckoning." The Atlantic countered with, "The punishment of passion, are we criminalizing outrage?" Cable news panels replayed the same 5 seconds of her live stream, dissecting her facial expressions like they were decoding Morse code. TikTok was even harsher, weaponizing humor as judgment. A skit of her live stream mixed with game show buzzer sounds went viral. 27 million views. Laughter wrapped around disbelief. The girl who once rewrote the political playbook was now being edited out of her own legacy. It wasn't just the public. Inside the Democratic Party, quiet repositioning began. Aggressive stars who had risen alongside her started releasing vague middle ground statements. They didn't name her. They didn't need to. "We must balance passion with discipline. Let's ensure our words lift us, not trap us." Subtle, surgical, effective. Even Bernie, Her mentor, the man whose campaign she had helped reignite, had gone silent. Her messages to him were received but never answered, and that silence, more than any court order, stung with finality. The financial strain worsened. Her legal bills were now staggering. Over $1.8 million in just under 6 weeks. Donations had slowed. Fundraising emails were returned with polite unsubscribes. Supporters who once maxed out their contributions began replying with careful questions. Can you explain the evidence they're citing? Is there any truth to the email? Should we be concerned about long-term viability? Questions wrapped in concern, but concern was another form of doubt. And doubt spreads. Her financial advisors were blunt. You're weeks away from insolvency, and if you lose this judgment in full, you're finished. They suggested options: a mortgage against family property, a personal loan from a private financier, crowdfunding. She rejected them all. No, she said, this mistake is mine. The weight should be mine too. Back in court, the dynamic shifted. Kennedy's lawyers now focused less on her live stream and more on damages. Reputation, they argued, is a form of currency, and AOC had tried to bankrupt Kennedy's with a sentence. Their witness, a reputation damage analyst, explained in painful detail. Senator Kennedy was viewed favorably by 68% of his constituents before the accusation. That number dropped by 17% in 2 weeks. They showed emails sent to Kennedy's office, some threatening, some mocking. One read, "We see you, Big Oil Kennedy. Hope you choke on Exxon cash." Kennedy didn't react to the reading. He just sat there, his hands folded on the desk, a stillness about him that felt more powerful than outrage. It wasn't just about oil money. It was about trust, the idea that a leader's name meant something. And she had, intentionally or not, set fire to his. Her legal team cross-examined, trying to poke holes. Couldn't this drop be due to other political factors? Wasn't he already controversial in his environmental voting record? The witness agreed, but his tone remained composed. Controversial isn't the same as criminal, and that's the line she crossed. Those words echoed. The line she crossed. By the end of the 4th week, it became clear. The judge was preparing to rule on preliminary damages. The jury's role would come later. But now, he would decide if the case warranted financial consequence before a full trial. And all signs pointed to yes. Alexandria spent the night before the ruling alone. No team. No meetings. Just her in that same apartment, once a symbol of triumph, now a holding cell of reflection. She opened her email draft, the letter she'd started but never sent. She read it again. And for the first time she wept. Not because she was losing, but because she no longer knew what she had left to protect. The next morning, the judge entered, robe flowing like a curtain before a stage. He didn't waste words. In consideration of submitted evidence, this court finds sufficient basis to proceed with financial review. Preliminary damages assessment, $7.5 million. The courtroom did not gasp. They had expected it. But Alexandria's heart did. $7.5 million before even reaching the trial's final judgment, a number that wasn't just symbolic, it was devastating. She closed her eyes, and in that dark, quiet space behind her lids, she remembered the sound of her own voice on that live stream. So sure, so righteous, so full of belief. She wished she could reach back in time and shake that version of herself. Not to silence her, but to remind her, power comes with precision. Fire without aim burns your own house. In the days that followed, conservative media declared victory. Justice served, read one Fox banner. AOC humbled, read another. She didn't read them, but she felt them. In the stares on the street, in the chill inside her office, in the emails that no longer ended with hearts and fist emojis. She received one anonymous message, unsigned, with just 4 words, "You taught us better." That one stayed with her. It didn't end with a bang. Not a courtroom decision, not a viral knockout. The final chapter arrived more like a sunrise, quiet, unstoppable, and brighter than anyone expected. Caroline Hale had weathered the storm, not alone, not unscathed, but standing. Daniel Hale had gone from shadow to symbol, not by changing who he was, but by refusing to. And now the question wasn't, what happened? It was, what's next? By the second week of October, the world had shifted. Not globally, not dramatically, but in its corners, in conversations that had grown just a little more aware, a little less careless. The sound of mockery was quieter, the tone of jokes sharper, more hesitant. Caroline stood in front of the mirror, fastening the same silver cross she wore the night it all began. Her stylist asked, "You want something different for the summit?" Caroline shook her head. "No, they'll remember this one." She wasn't wrong. The Veterans Honor Summit in Virginia wasn't meant to be a finale, just another event. Folded flags, keynote speeches, long lines of chairs under an open sky. But when Caroline Hale took the podium, the hush that fell over the crowd told everyone this wasn't just another address. The cameras rolled. The wind held its breath. Caroline leaned into the mic, but her voice was steady, controlled, measured. "A few weeks ago," she began, "someone made a joke about the man I love, and in doing so, he revealed something much bigger than a bad punchline. He reminded us how quickly this culture forgets what dignity looks like." She paused, scanning the crowd. "When we stood up that night, we weren't trying to start a movement. We were responding to something too many people recognize. A moment when silence would have been easier, but not honorable." In the third row, Daniel sat beside veterans in uniform. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left hers. "We didn't yell. We didn't threaten. We didn't storm out. We spoke, and we let the truth walk in behind us." Applause built, but she lifted her hand gently. This story was never about one man, one joke, or one stage. It's about every woman who's been told she's too strong. Every man whose service has been made into someone else's soundbite. It's about what happens when we stop clapping for cruelty. There were tears in the audience, veterans holding hands, reporters putting their pens down. She continued, "There's a temptation when you're mocked or misunderstood to fight dirty, to shout louder. But I've learned that the clearest voices are the ones that don't change tone just because the world changes volume." A breeze tugged at her blazer. She let it. You don't have to belong to the in crowd to have impact. You don't need a stage to make a stand. You don't need a spotlight to be seen. Then she smiled, gently. You just need truth, and someone willing to carry it without apology. She stepped back. The applause didn't erupt, it roared. After the speech, Caroline and Daniel slipped away from the crowd, through a side gate, down a quiet path. No reporters followed. Under a grove of trees they stopped. Daniel turned to her. "That sounded like a final chapter." She shook her head. "That was just punctuation. They didn't talk about Hollywood, about the blogs, about the studio rumors or the whisper campaigns. They didn't need to. They had already outlasted them." But in a quiet corner of Los Angeles, someone else watched the clip of that speech. Max Raines, alone, off the grid, his lawyer gone, his agent silent, his inbox quiet for the first time in years. He watched the final 2 minutes again. You just need truth and someone willing to carry it without apology. He sat there, no whiskey, no remote in hand, just silence. And for the first time since that night, he didn't argue with the screen. He just listened. Back in Washington, Caroline returned to her post. The press corps asked about the summit, about the backlash, about the praise. She answered every question with clarity but without ego. One reporter tried to bait her. "Do you think Max Raines got what he deserved?" She smiled faintly. "I think he got what he expected, and then something he didn't, accountability." Another hand raised. "What's the takeaway here?" Caroline paused, then answered, "The takeaway is this. Power isn't in the mic. It's in how you use it. And when someone uses it to belittle service, you remind them, quietly, firmly, that service never needed a spotlight to shine." Daniel's profile in the Military Journal went on to be nominated for a national award, not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. Soldiers wrote in to say they saw themselves in it. One even said, "It made me remember why I joined." Keanu Reeves never issued a second tweet. He didn't need to. His words, "Caroline Hale spoke the truth, and the truth held," were etched into posters, shared on campus walls, and quoted in speeches. The Backlash tried to revive itself, but there was nothing left to cling to. Because Caroline never went after anyone. She just told the truth. People heard it. Daniel never became a politician, never sought fame, but his walk across that stage became a lesson in restraint taught in media seminars. She earned her voice. You just act like you deserve yours. That line didn't just live online. It became a phrase spoken in boardrooms, in classrooms, even in churches. And Caroline's final word on the entire saga, it came in the form of a donation. Quiet, unannounced. A check to the Veterans Charity from Gibson 19. No press release, just impact. On the memo line, Daniel wrote 3 words, "For the forgotten." And somewhere between the clamor of culture and the noise of narratives, one truth stood taller than the rest. Some people chase the spotlight. Others make the light follow them.